I bought the company that fired my father. They had no idea who I was. The pen hovered over the final document, its sleek black barrel trembling slightly in my hand. It wasn't nerves. That would be too simple an explanation for what coursed through me at that moment. This wasn't just a business transaction, it was a reckoning, years in the making. The boardroom of Ashworth Technologies gleamed with polished mahogany and chrome accents, every surface reflecting the empire I now owned lock, stock, and barrel. Around the table sat men and women who had no idea they were sealing their own fates, or perhaps more accurately, confronting the ghosts of decisions past. My father's face flashed before me, not as he looked when he died, but as he had been on the day everything changed. He wore his favorite navy suit, tie perfectly knotted, briefcase in one hand, pride in the other. That morning, he told me about his latest project, a revolutionary algorithm designed to streamline data processing across industries. "This is going to change things," he said, eyes alight with possibility. But instead of changing things for the better, that algorithm became his undoing. Ashworth Technologies had fired him without warning 6 months after acquiring his startup. They cited restructuring as the reason, though everyone knew the truth. They wanted his work, not him. Stripped of credit, stripped of purpose, stripped of dignity, my father never recovered. His health deteriorated rapidly, his spirit broken long before his body followed suit. And here I was, standing where those responsible once stood, ready to rewrite history. Growing up, I learned 2 things from my father: resilience and resourcefulness. He taught me how to code when I was 8, patient despite my endless questions. By 12, I could debug programs faster than most adults. When life knocked us down, we picked ourselves back up, always finding ways to adapt. After his death, I poured myself into school, earning scholarships that took me to MIT. There, I met Elena, my best friend and future partner in crime. Together, we built our first company during senior year, a small software development firm called Lumina Tech. Lumina grew steadily, fueled by late-night coding sessions and shared dreams of something greater. We weren't content with mediocrity, we wanted to disrupt industries, challenge norms, and leave our mark on the world. Our big break came when we developed Sentient AI, an artificial intelligence platform capable of predictive analytics far beyond anything else on the market. Venture capitalists clamored to invest, and within 3 years, we sold Lumina for a staggering sum. But money wasn't enough. Not anymore. Somewhere along the way, this journey stopped being about success and started becoming about justice. Every sleepless night, every victory, every setback, it all led me here to this moment. To Ashworth Technologies. The acquisition process had been meticulous, almost surgical in its precision. Over the course of 18 months, I quietly purchased shares through various shell companies, ensuring my identity remained hidden. The board members thought they were dealing with faceless investors, corporate entities interested only in profit margins. They had no clue that the young woman presenting herself as Victoria Lane, a fabricated persona complete with tailored suits and a British accent, was actually Claire Bennett, daughter of the man they'd cast aside like yesterday's news. Victoria Lane signed the papers with a flourish, her signature looping confidently across the dotted line. As the ink dried, I allowed myself a small smile. The trap was set. Now came the hard part. Walking through Ashworth's headquarters felt surreal. Employees bustled about, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring above their heads. Some recognized me from previous meetings under my Victoria Lane guise, offering polite nods or quick greetings. None suspected the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. I made a point to memorize faces, matching them to names and roles I'd studied tirelessly. These people mattered, not because of who they were individually, but because of what they represented collectively. At the heart of Ashworth lay its innovation labs, once the domain of visionaries like my father. Now, they churned out incremental improvements rather than groundbreaking ideas. Morale among the staff seemed low, stifled by layers of bureaucracy and fear of failure. Creativity doesn't thrive in such environments, and it showed. Projects languished, potential wasted. Watching it unfold filled me with equal parts anger and determination. Elena joined me shortly after the acquisition, slipping seamlessly into her role as Chief Technology Officer. Her presence provided both comfort and strategic advantage. While I navigated the political minefield of upper management, she worked behind the scenes, gathering intel and rallying support from disillusioned employees. Together, we formed a formidable team, united by a shared mission to transform Ashworth from within. The first few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, evaluations, and subtle power plays. I introduced myself as Victoria Lane, newly appointed CEO, emphasizing transparency and collaboration. Behind closed doors, however, I began dismantling the structures that had enabled Ashworth's toxic culture. Department heads found themselves replaced overnight, their positions filled by individuals loyal to Elena and me. Key decision-makers suddenly found their authority questioned, their actions scrutinized. One afternoon, I called a town hall meeting, addressing the entire company via video conference. Standing at the podium, I surveyed rows of expectant faces, each employee hoping for answers, reassurance, or perhaps just clarity amidst the chaos. "Change is coming," I announced, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Not just superficial adjustments, but fundamental shifts in how we operate, innovate, and treat one another. A murmur rippled through the crowd, curiosity mingling with apprehension. I continued, outlining plans to restructure teams, eliminate unnecessary red tape, and prioritize employee well-being. Most importantly, I promised accountability, from top executives down to entry-level staff. No corner of Ashworth would remain untouched by reform. As I spoke, memories surfaced unbidden, my father teaching me binary code, cheering me on at robotics competitions, holding me close after receiving the termination letter. Each word carried weight, layered with emotion I couldn't fully suppress. When I finished, silence hung heavy in the air before erupting into applause. For the first time since taking control, I saw hope flicker in people's eyes. Yet, not everyone welcomed these changes. Resistance bubbled beneath the surface, manifesting in whispered conversations and passive-aggressive emails. Certain factions within the company viewed me as an outsider, a threat to their entrenched interests. Their leader, Richard Caldwell, proved particularly troublesome. As COO, he wielded considerable influence, leveraging decades of experience to undermine my initiatives whenever possible. Richard reminded me of the men who had dismissed my father all those years ago, arrogant, entitled, convinced of his own infallibility. During board meetings, he challenged my decisions relentlessly, masking thinly veiled hostility behind professional decorum. Outside the conference room, he cultivated alliances, spreading doubt about my leadership capabilities. Despite his efforts, I refused to engage directly. Instead, I focused on building relationships with key stakeholders, demonstrating results that spoke louder than any argument Richard could muster. Slowly but surely, his grip on the company weakened. Still, I knew he wouldn't go quietly. Men like Richard always fought dirtiest when backed into corners. Months passed, and Ashworth began to transform. Innovation flourished as creative minds found new freedom to experiment. Employee satisfaction soared, reflected in improved retention rates and glowing reviews online. Even Wall Street took notice, sending our stock price climbing steadily upward. Success bred momentum, momentum bred confidence, and confidence bred ambition. Why had Ashworth treated my father so cruelly? What drove them to discard a man who had poured his soul into an idea that ultimately became one of their most profitable ventures? The question gnawed at me, a splinter buried deep beneath the skin of my resolve. I knew the official story, that restructuring was necessary, that redundancies were inevitable in the fast-paced world of tech innovation. But I also knew better. My father wasn't just another cog in the machine, he was the spark that ignited their success. And they extinguished him without a second thought. The search for answers led me down corridors lined with secrets. Archives stored in climate-controlled rooms held decades of memos, emails, and internal communications. Elena and I spent countless hours combing through these documents, piecing together fragments of truth like detectives solving a cold case. It wasn't long before patterns emerged, patterns that painted a far darker picture than I'd imagined. Among the files, we discovered correspondence between Richard Caldwell and other executives from the time of my father's termination. In one particularly damning email chain, Caldwell referred to my father as a liability, whose presence might stir up unnecessary attention. Another executive chimed in, agreeing that cutting ties would be cleaner, ensuring no distractions while they integrated his algorithm into their systems. Cleaner. As if erasing a human being could ever be described as such. Reading those words felt like stepping into icy water. Each sentence chilled me further, confirming what I'd always suspected but never dared to believe. This wasn't about business strategy or corporate efficiency. This was about greed, ego, and fear, the kind of fear that makes powerful people destroy anything, or anyone, that threatens their control. Armed with evidence, I faced a moral dilemma. Exposing the truth would vindicate my father, offering closure not only to me but perhaps to others who had suffered similar fates under Ashworth's regime. Yet doing so risked derailing the progress we'd made within the company. Employees who had finally begun to trust leadership might lose faith altogether, seeing Ashworth not as a place of opportunity but as a monument to corruption. Could I afford to shatter the fragile foundation of hope we'd built? Elena urged caution. You didn't come this far just to burn it all down, she said during one of our late-night strategy sessions. If you expose them now, you'll undo everything. Is that what your dad would have wanted? Her question lingered in the air, heavy with implication. What would my father have wanted? Justice, certainly, but not at the cost of collateral damage. He believed in building bridges, not burning them. Still, the weight of silence pressed against my conscience. How could I lead a company built on lies without addressing its past sins? In the weeks that followed, I decided to take a different approach. Rather than confronting Richard Caldwell outright, I began implementing changes designed to dismantle the culture of exploitation that had allowed such injustices to occur. Transparency became non-negotiable. Every decision, every policy shift, was accompanied by clear explanations and open forums where employees could voice concerns. Whistleblower protections were strengthened, empowering individuals to speak up without fear of retaliation. Simultaneously, I worked to isolate Caldwell and his allies. By promoting ethical leaders and fostering alliances with influential stakeholders, I gradually diminished his power base. His attempts to rally opposition grew increasingly desperate, culminating in thinly veiled threats during private meetings. You're playing a dangerous game, Victoria, he warned one afternoon, leaning across the conference table with barely concealed contempt. People don't forget betrayal. His words struck a nerve, though I refused to let him see it. Instead, I smiled coolly, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. Betrayal implies trust was given in the first place, Richard. From where I stand, loyalty has always been earned, not assumed. As winter gave way to spring, Ashworth Technologies continued its metamorphosis. The once stifling atmosphere gave rise to something vibrant and alive, buzzing with energy and possibility. Employees spoke openly about feeling valued, supported, and inspired, a stark contrast to the toxic environment I'd inherited. Even skeptics began to acknowledge the positive impact of the reforms, albeit grudgingly. Yet, despite the outward transformation, shadows still lingered in the corners of my mind. Richard Caldwell remained a thorn in my side, his influence waning but not yet extinguished. More troubling was the knowledge that exposing the full extent of Ashworth's wrongdoing loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. I couldn't ignore it forever, nor could I delay indefinitely. Eventually, the reckoning would come, and when it did, I needed to be ready. One evening, as I sat alone in my office overlooking the city skyline, I found myself staring at a framed photograph of my father. Taken during happier times, it captured him mid-laugh, eyes crinkled with joy. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons he taught me, the strength he instilled, and the fire he lit within me. Whatever happened next, I knew I carried his legacy forward, not as a weapon of vengeance but as a beacon of change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, I let myself rest, knowing that the journey ahead, no matter how uncertain, was one worth taking. The next morning, I arrived at the office before dawn, the city still cloaked in shadows. My reflection stared back at me from the glass walls of Ashworth Technologies headquarters, a silhouette framed by the faint glow of streetlights below. It was a moment of quiet solitude before the storm, a brief reprieve to steel myself for what lay ahead. Today wasn't just another day, it was the beginning of the endgame. Richard Caldwell had grown increasingly erratic in recent weeks. His attempts to undermine my authority had escalated into outright sabotage, though his efforts were clumsy and transparent. He'd tried rallying board members to challenge my leadership, leaked misinformation about upcoming projects, and even gone so far as to accuse me of mismanaging company funds. None of it stuck, but the tension simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. Men like Richard thrived on control, and losing it meant losing everything they held dear: power, status, identity. For him, this wasn't just a professional battle, it was personal. And while part of me pitied him, another part understood that compassion could only take me so far. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. By mid-morning, I called an emergency meeting of the executive team. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as key players filed in, their expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled anxiety. Richard entered last, his usual swagger replaced by something more guarded, almost feral. He took his seat at the far end of the table, eyes locked onto mine with predatory intensity. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing at the head of the table. "As you know, we've made significant strides over the past several months. Morale is up, innovation is thriving, and our financial performance speaks for itself." Pausing, I let my gaze sweep across the room, lingering briefly on Richard before continuing. "But there are unresolved issues within this company, issues that predate my arrival yet continue to cast a shadow over our progress." Murmurs rippled through the group, uneasy glances exchanged between colleagues. Richard leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, feigning indifference. But I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes, a crack in his carefully constructed facade. "I'm referring specifically to how this company has historically treated its employees," I continued, my voice steady despite the weight of what I was about to reveal. "Too often, loyalty has been met with betrayal, hard work rewarded with dismissal, and contributions erased without acknowledgement. This isn't speculation, it's fact." Reaching into the folder beside me, I pulled out printed copies of the incriminating emails Elena and I had uncovered. Sliding them across the table, I watched as each executive picked up a copy, their faces paling as they read. Richard's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, unwilling, or perhaps unable, to deny the evidence staring him in the face. "These documents detail deliberate actions taken to marginalize and silence individuals whose ideas threaten the status quo," I said, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. "One such individual was my father, a man many of you may not remember, but whose work laid the foundation for Ashworth's success. He was fired not because he lacked value, but because retaining him posed a risk to those in power." The room fell deathly silent, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Eyes darted toward Richard, who now sat rigid, his composure crumbling under the collective scrutiny. Finally, someone spoke, a senior VP named Margaret Chen, her voice trembling with barely contained outrage. This is unacceptable," she stammered, holding up the document. "If these allegations are true, and I see no reason to doubt their authenticity, then we have failed not only as leaders but as human beings." Her words seemed to break the dam, unleashing a flood of reactions. Some executives expressed shock, others guilt, and a few outright anger, not at me, but at the culture that had allowed such injustices to persist unchecked. Richard, however, remained eerily quiet, his earlier bravado replaced by a cold, calculating stare. When the initial wave of emotion subsided, I addressed the group once more. "This isn't about assigning blame or dredging up the past for the sake of vengeance," I said firmly. "It's about acknowledging our mistakes and ensuring they never happen again. That starts with accountability, from every single one of us." Turning my attention to Richard, I added, "Including you, Richard. Your actions, and those of your predecessors, have shaped this company in ways that cannot be ignored. If Ashworth is to move forward, we need transparency, integrity, and leadership committed to doing what's right, not what's expedient." For a moment, Richard looked as though he might lash out, his hands gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. But then slowly he stood, his expression inscrutable. "You think exposing a few old emails makes you untouchable," he sneered, his voice low and venomous. "You're playing a game you don't understand, Victoria. Or should I say, Claire?" The room froze, all eyes snapping to me as the name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Richard's smirk widened, triumphant in his discovery, or so he thought. But instead of flinching, I smiled, leaning forward slightly as if sharing a secret. "Congratulations, Richard," I replied, my voice calm and measured. "You've finally figured it out." "Yes, I'm Claire Bennett, daughter of the man you threw away like yesterday's trash. And yes, I bought this company to make sure people like you can't hide behind titles and power anymore." Gasps echoed around the table, followed by stunned silence. Richard's confidence faltered for the first time, his smug grin slipping into something closer to panic. "This changes nothing," he spat, though his voice lacked conviction. "You're still just a figurehead trying to clean up a mess you didn't create." "You're wrong," I countered, rising to my full height. "I'm not here to clean up a mess, I'm here to dismantle the system that created it. Starting today, Every decision, every policy, every promotion will reflect the values this company should have embraced all along: fairness, respect, and accountability. If you can't align with that vision, then perhaps it's time for you to leave. The fallout from that meeting reverberated throughout Ashworth Technologies like a seismic wave. Employees whispered about the revelations during coffee breaks, speculating about what would happen next. Some feared retaliation from Richard's remaining allies, while others celebrated the prospect of real change. Amidst the chaos, I worked tirelessly to solidify the reforms, appointing new leaders who shared my vision and reinforcing protections for whistleblowers. Richard, meanwhile, disappeared from view for several days. Rumors swirled about his whereabouts. Some claimed he was plotting his comeback, others suggested he'd already begun packing his office. When he finally re-emerged, it was with an announcement: he intended to step down as COO, citing personal reasons for his departure. While skeptics suspected ulterior motives, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. After years of injustice, the man responsible for my father's downfall was finally being forced to confront the consequences of his actions. Yet, even as victories mounted, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't entirely won. Richard's exit marked a turning point, but true transformation required more than removing bad actors. It demanded rebuilding trust, fostering inclusivity, and proving that Ashworth Technologies was capable of meaningful change. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but I refused to waver. One evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I paused in front of a mural depicting the company's history. Once dominated by images of wealthy executives and flashy product launches, it now included portraits of everyday employees, the innovators, problem solvers, and dreamers who truly defined Ashworth's legacy. Among them was a small plaque bearing my father's name, honoring his contributions in perpetuity. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I traced the letters with my fingertips. "We did it, Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking slightly. "Not just for you, but for everyone who deserves better." And with that, I stepped into the night, ready to face whatever came next.